we see it so many times with people who, all of a sudden at the very end of life, you'll have a rush of family come in because they haven't seen this person for so long. So it's just like the appreciation for life and who is in your life, making sure the relationships that you have are strong, like not waiting to say I love you to someone, not waiting to give them flowers until later. Like it's kind of enriched the relationships around me, just to be more, just stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought this would be a real interesting conversation, because I find that in a world where you go to every day and work every day, there's end of life going on, constantly, and that's a big part of your life is end of life. And I was like, what an interesting perspective it would be to see like what your gains are on life itself after seeing end of life so much, and seeing it not only through your own eyes, but often seeing it through the eyes of the people that come through there as well, because those people come in there and you're seeing their perspectives, right? You're observing all the time. And I know when we first talked and we first met, you had like such a cool like history of, all the time you spent out in Africa and doing what you did out there. And I thought it would be an interesting conversation about like what people pursue, what the pursuits of life are and what matters most to people. So yeah, I thought it would be cool to just have you here and chat with Trina and I on perspective. What do you think?
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you guys for having us here today. We're very excited. A little nervous.
Yeah.
Very excited.
Yeah. Like, I mean, even when I first, sat and met with you guys and the first times we talked, I didn't know what a hospice was. I knew hospice, hospital, okay, palliative maybe, but what's the difference and, why a hospice? So maybe you can like just start like, did you ever hear this part before, or you must know?
Well, I've worked with, not with this hospice, but I've worked a lot with different ones, more so in Brampton.
Okay.
And then we just would engage like the whole family. We get the whole family involved in things before the end of, like before the death occurred and after the death. So there was just that was my experience with it.
Right.
Certain ones in
So when you were planning your career out, right, you said, I'm going to go work in a...
No.
Right.
No one ever really thinks that, yeah.
What were your aspirations when you were starting out in your...
I think for nursing, like I went into it because it wasn't going to be very long. So I did like practical nursing because you don't know what you want to do. Like no clue. Out of high school, I have to pick something.
Okay.
Pick something that was completely not what I wanted it to be, and then worked. And then I was like, well, my mom's a nurse. My grandmother's a nurse. I'm like, well, let's give this a try.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So it was 2 years like practical nursing program, and I loved it, and I was good at it.
What makes you good at nursing? What makes a person good at nursing?
I think just having that personality to, engage with others and help others. And you get fulfillment out of that, right? Like you go to work and you feel like you've accomplished something, you've done something well.
And you're very passionate.
Yeah. So it's just, you, even though like you're giving a lot of yourself, you're still getting a lot for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the circle with being service to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've had a similar sort of pathway like through life as well, going out there and service to humanity and all the work that you've done. What kind of led you into the world of hospice, Michelle?
Well, I guess nursing as a whole, I graduated university or first took something else in university, environmental science, and that just didn't work out.
Wow. Well, I see the path.
Right?
Like that.
But then I had a volunteer experience in Kenya, and it made me realize how fortunate we happen to be in North America for the health services that we actually receive and have access to. And so it was a goal of mine to be a nurse. And actually, I look back at like a little book that I wrote when I was little, like nursing was one of the top 10, professions that I had potentially wanted to be. But anyway, went into nursing and
After your Kenya trip.
after Kenya trip, went back to school, went through university, became a nurse, worked downtown Toronto. And then my goal of being a nurse was to go back and serve in Kenya. And so I did that for about 15 years. But when I moved back to Canada in 2019, I knew Hill House, and I knew Hill House Hospice was the right place for me because, when you do something that it's almost like your body fills with liquid gold, and it just, it's the right thing to do, whether it's a running rush, whether it's like spending time with your kids, or I drove past Hill House and I was like, that's the place where I am supposed to be.
Wow.
It was, during the interview process, and I was like, I should go and see the place. But it was like that feeling, and I get that feeling like almost every day. Like it's such it's end of life and it's death, but it's so much more about actually a celebration of life every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like it's funny you say that the way you just said it, because when typically you hear about hospice, it's like, think about that's where you go and life ends. We live in I think maybe a world, or maybe it's the way I've seen it for so long, has been, life is what you celebrate, right? And while you're living it, and to for a lot of people to talk about what happens end of life, and there's so many, questions that people talk about, right? When you started thinking about moving into working in a hospice, what were like the first maybe challenges you noticed that a hospice has to deal with on a regular basis?
I think so for myself, I worked in the community before I went. It was a kind of a smooth transition into working at Hill House. I did it as like a casual thing that on my days off from my regular job, I would go to Hill House because it was fun. We laugh every day. There are sad parts to it, yes, but we find joy in everything that we do. A huge part of it is because you have that constant reminder that life is finite. There is an end, and it's something that we don't talk about. But when you're reminded of that every single day, the way you live is more to appreciate life in itself. So it's a constant reminder to kind of live the way you want to live and find joy in doing the things you want to do. I think that for myself, it really helped me as to decide to say no to things. Right. Why am I putting myself through this if I don't want to do this?
That's a huge thing.
Yeah. It could even be as simple as feeling obligated to go to some kind of function or something like that, and just be like, I don't want to do this, so why am I making myself do this? Because it's not happy for me. It's not going to bring me joy, and if I don't do it, it's okay. Mm-hmm. And I feel so much better speaking out, as in saying no, because I always had a hard time saying no. It was always be like, sure, I'll be there, I'll do whatever. And then it was more, I need to take time for myself, and I need to find out what I want to do and choose the way I want to live.
I think that's such an important piece of what made me think about is I remember talking to people about just their style within conflict, right? And there's this little axis, and the people in the middle are the accommodators. So they're not really assertive, but they're highly cooperative too. But they're always accommodating other people, and what I'm hearing is putting someone else's what their expectations of you are, or just always
especially
kind of
if you're compassionate to be.
Yeah, and hustling yourself to meet everyone's needs of you, whether it be social or taking care of them or whatever it is. And oftentimes the accommodators are so depleted because then they never get their needs met at the end of the day. So I think that's such a powerful thing to bring forward, because it's something all of us probably slide into at times, is not being true to ourselves and what we're looking for, right? And just accommodating, and it depletes. So what happened for you when you started to put boundaries in place for yourself more, and not be and say no to things? You said you say no and you'd feel better, but how did that momentum increase?
It was great from the very first time you did it.
Yeah. No.
All worked out perfect.
It's very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Well, it is uncomfortable, especially when like you're around people where you always said yes to everything.
And people's reaction to
Yeah.
doing that too,
Yeah,
right?
I took a step back because I was one to volunteer a ton. And when you take a step back, like sometimes they don't really believe you.
Right.
You're like they still ask you to help out with things. I was involved like in a youth program, and I said I couldn't do this. At the time I was going back to school to get my RN. I was working full time. I'm like, this is too much to handle. And even after that conversation, it was like a week later getting a phone call, hey, can you help out with this?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like it was heartbreaking at first because I'm like, I'm letting all these people down. But if I don't take care of myself, then I'm not going to be there's going to be no benefit for me to be there.
Yeah.
Because I won't be there like mentally and spiritually. Like I wouldn't be there.
And you attribute this to something you've learned after working.
Yeah.
Explain that. Help me understand it.
I think it's just when you like in society, we don't like talk about death or the fact that we're not immortal. Mm-hmm. So, there is an end to this life. And I think it's just a constant reminder that, we see it so many times with people who, all of a sudden at the very end of life, you'll have a rush of family come in because they haven't seen this person for so long. So it's just like the appreciation for life and who is in your life, making sure the relationships that you have are strong, like not waiting to, say I love you to someone, not waiting to give them flowers until later. Like it's kind of enrich the relationships around me, just to be more, just stronger. Because it's a constant reminder.
So what drew you, Michelle? You said you had interviews and you said this is where you belong. What aligned so much for you with a hospice of all places?
Yeah.
I always joke. I said, that's one in Kenya. She spend more time in Kenya than I.
That's too funny.
She knows my
We're
role.
Kenyan, yeah.
She knows my role better than
Like the back of my hand.
Yeah.
City. Love those roundabouts there. No. Well, I think, and in Kenya, like the elderly are so revered, right? It's not the elderly, but it's the elders. And they are who we turn to for wisdom, who we turn to for conflict resolution, who we turn to for so much guidance. And so to see how I feel like a little bit in North American society, we don't really take care of our elders as much as we should. Like just in terms of, we were just talking up there, and we talk all the time about it, but
Sure.
oh my gosh, how can, care for seniors, end of life care be less funded than when somebody's brought into the world? Like how are we less important as a human being when we're dying, when we're experiencing end of life, than when we're first brought into this world? I guess I'm not really answering the question, but it's those moments, right? Like that you talk about, it's life is built and created on so many small, beautiful moments that happen every single day. And I think that's what hospice really brings to me is that, one of our residents, she got her nails painted red today or something. And that's just the most amazing thing. Or we're able to hear a story, or we're able to like dance the chicken dance with them as our music therapist is there, and just finding beauty and joy in those small moments. Like you do, like yesterday was beautiful outside, like being outside and experiencing the sun, and like that's awesome. So,
Or even I find sometimes too, I know when I work with people that were dying, is just laughing. Sometimes it's some of the most horrific things that are happening too. Because like you can lose a lot of dignity when you're dying, right? You can lose a lot of dignity, and it's a very chaotic path for some people. But I found when you have the capacity to be like, laugh at that, and it just brings this energy to it. And people are like, how can you guys laugh at that? But it's like, this is life. This is life. This is part of it. And it's okay to not always be sad, because there is laughter in it and there is funny moments, but then you can cry 2 seconds after you laugh, or laugh because it's actually the same spectrum, laughing and crying, right? So That's what I always loved about that, is those moments where things are like really hard and you're like, we still have the capacity to laugh
Yeah.
when it's so dark, right?
Yeah. Kind of find like humor and joy in little things. And I find too, the residents that we work with, like they want to talk about it.
Yes.
They are okay with, but a lot of the times they don't talk about it because no one has brought it up to them, or like someone else is not comfortable talking about it. But a lot of people who are dying, they, there are things that they want to talk about. They might be fearful of some things. They might be, having a lot of these emotions, but everyone's kind of nervous of what to say, or like how to say it, or what do you even do? I'm like, this is the same person that you have known your whole life, but why can't you talk to them now? Just because they're dying doesn't mean they're different.
Right.
So just try, and even when they're at a stage where they might not be, speaking and things like that, but just keeping, who they were, like, alive. There was one person that we recently had that he always had a pen in his pocket. And it just happens that the shirts that we use at the hospice have pockets on the chest. And so we always kept a pen in his pocket.
Because that was his dignity.
And I read his obituary last night, and it was very much like, with a pen in his pocket, he peacefully died at Hill House. So it's just like little things of like keeping those memories alive and
having the music they like. Yeah.
Music they like. And you think that like people will be like, oh, like, these extravagant things that have happened. And yes, we've had, like we've had weddings, we've had, large birthday parties. But there's also little tiny things like, someone's so excited that they can have a grilled cheese because they've been told for so long they can't have sodium. Yeah. They can't have salt. They have to stay away from it. And then when you give them that option, and that's the only thing they talked about that day, is how good that grilled cheese was.
Yeah.
But it's just the little things too.
So when you're working in a hospice, though, you're have this attitude, you have this outlook that you obviously had before you even got there, and this really aligned with you. But when you're sitting there working day to day, there's got to be such a large amount of sadness through the people that come through there, not particularly the people that are maybe even dying, but the people that are coming to visit them, their friends and their family, and there's a sadness around them. Or is it, first of all, is that even true? Right? Like that usually people approach death and end of life with this sadness, right? Is that what you see generally? I mean,
everyone's different, but it is something that we do see, right? Like it's kind of like death has this, it's been kind of like something to be feared, something that's really sad.
Right. The loss of a loved one.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be sad. So we do have people that come that are very sad, very emotional. But we talk through things, even little things of like talking about who that person was to them, and different memories that they have, and just kind of turning it into like concentrating on living and the life that they lived. And that they're living right now. Like, how can we make this the best quality still, even though someone is dying? So as the staff, like, we kind of tried to change thinking to, we're concentrating on living. Like, they're still here. So we're going to just make this the best day that we can. But sometimes there's other people that have been, very open with their health struggles, with their family, with the plans that they've made for their future and when they die or when they're dying. And I find that those families are the ones that, they've already had tough conversations. They've already talked about everything. And those are the ones that are the most present for that person, just being by their side and being their emotional support. And, the stories that they tell us about, different things they did, years ago, and how much you learn about them. And yeah, like there's crying. That's okay. Crying is normal.
Anger too, right?
Yeah. Sometimes there's anger.
Yeah.
A whole lot of emotions come out at that point. But it's just something that like we embrace it all.
Yeah. So like in hearing you speak about that, like what I think about is in the people that I've worked with, or just even my own experience with that, Like I know with a friend of mine, she knew that she was dying, and it was we actually knew that the timeline that was happening, and just having those conversations, particularly with children, I've noticed too. Children they're so intuitive. First of all, they know what's up even if you don't tell them most of the time. But just what have you noticed with families that have gone through this capacity to have these conversations? Because what I've witnessed for myself and with families I've supported is your capacity when the death does occur, it's still devastating, and it's still, because it's occurred, it's finite. But there's almost this, but the denial isn't there as much, and because the denial loop and the anger loop can happen a lot there. So I know for myself in particular, it's helped ease the grief process with this kind of work before the death. Like, have you noticed that for yourselves in the work you're doing with families?
I think like when you've had those conversations before the death actually occurs, when you know like someone's wishes, what they want, there's a lot less stress.
Yeah.
Because people are okay with the decisions that they've made because they've made it on their behalf. They've had these conversations of what kind of care they would like, or where would they like that care at the end of their life. And it's just no stress. Like they don't have that, like possible guilt feeling, like, did I do the right thing?
Right.
Am I sure this was the right, the right decision to make? There isn't that. So it almost like lightens everything because they don't have that stress of like, okay, like, did I do everything that they would want me to do?
Mm-hmm.
There's a saying, what's that saying? Don't be sad that it's over, be happy,
Grateful that it happened.
Happy or grateful that it happened. So, they say that, but still in that time, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there are all these, what I'm wondering about is there are all these emotions flying around. And you, obviously, the two of you, we've worked together for some time a little bit, but, you have this way of being able to channel it, right? To manage your emotions, because you're trained, first of all, you're professionals at what you do. And you've got experience, so over time. So you've seen this happen time and time and time again. So you know what to expect, if this happens, right? You've been through it. But for many people, right, what they're going through, they don't go through as often, or maybe even going through it for the, first time. So with all of these unregulated, all this emotions flying around, do you feel like any of that on you while you're there working?
Well, 100%.
Okay.
And sometimes it's harder than other times, right?
Yeah.
But you remember that, or it's like we're there for them, and what a privilege it is to be there for the families and to be there for the residents. And so we have to be the strong ones. We have to be the ones to be supportive. And so it's whatever emotions are there, and it's not like we do feel them.
Do you
we feel them 150%.
Yeah.
But then that's kind of the beauty about being human beings together, is that we can experience a small glimpse into what this experience is like for them, and what a privilege to be able to be there for them and just do whatever we can to make those moments as special or as memorable or as honorable as they can be.
And so, this might be hard to talk about, but I hope you're okay. I'm just curious. After some days, and like you said, some days are going to be easier or harder than other days. What's a really tough day look like? Like when's it like really tough?
I think for myself, like I compartmentalize everything.
Yeah.
So it really helps me. But I mean, you have, there are, like we talk about like these good experiences that we have, because we want to dwell on those rather than the ones of sadness and grief and fear and things like that. But they do happen.
Right.
So there are situations where we have residents that, might have children the same age as, the nurse has the same age as children as they do. Like I've been like screamed at by a 14-year-old to do something for her mom, like the moment she died. And you just stand there because they need an outlet for their emotions too. And for myself, I'd rather it be me than someone they're closer to. Mm-hmm. There are days where, we as a group like to talk through everything. So if there has been like all the deaths are expected, but sometimes they come a lot faster than we expected. They might have had some kind of event or something like that. So it's coming together and like immediately on the phone with the staff to see how they're doing.
Yeah.
Immediately someone else will go to the hospice to make sure that not only the family is doing okay, but the staff is too.
Miranda's so good at that. Like, she is so in tune and her finger on the pulse with the team. And you get closer to some families than other families. So if there is a more unexpected death per se, like Amanda's the first one on the phone, checking in with everybody, because you're extremely empathetic. Like, you feel what they're feeling. And Dr. Berger, our medical director, like, there's a case recently where he's like, okay, I'm heading into hospice right now.
He actually like asked, should I go? I'm like, I don't even have to say anything. I know you left your house.
Yeah.
He's on his way to make sure. And you hear it in the staff's voices and they cry, and that's okay.
Totally.
Just to be that reassurance that like everything you did,
you're carrying people's emotions. The thing with empathy is you embody it, right? Like, it's like at the beginning when you said that it fills up with gold. when you engage in empathy, you fill up with the emotion of the other, and so it's really important to tune into that, because the act of compassion is the embodiment of empathy seeking solutions, and so that's what you do when you offer different pathways for families. But when it comes to the staff, I think that check-in is so important, because it could be sometimes the most innocuous thing that, like you were mentioning, like kids the same age, or if you just identify one thing in your own lived experience, it can be the smallest detail, that death or that experience just amplifies for yourself, because you have that kind of that shared perspective. Sometimes it takes you out of your dissociative box that you put yourself in to be able to do that work. So I think that's so great that you guys support your staff that way, because it's a high burnout, I would imagine. I don't know what the statistics are or anything for it, but I can imagine compassion fatigue being an incredible thing for...
Is there such a thing? Like, do you...
For lack of a better word, but yes.
Well, you just said it, right?
I know, but I don't like the title of it, right? It's
I never feel like I have compassion fatigue. I feel like being compassionate towards others actually gives me purpose. Yeah. So then it it really helps me. Yeah.
You don't feel like you're spending anything.
No.
Wow.
No. It's hard to explain like how that.
But I think that's because you have a nurturing relationship with your staff. Because I think if you didn't have that supportive network, then if you're doing that work and you don't have the supportive staff, then it kind of almost feels like you're working in a silo. So then you do exhaust yourself, because you guys support each other. So that,
and you have to like count on them and everyone to be very honest.
Yes. Yeah.
Like I've had people come and they'd be like, this reminds me of this.
Right.
So giving them the opportunity to take a step back. And most of them don't, but then it just means that they've shared that with you, so to be extra vigilant and checking in with them.
On it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we always we talked about this so many times. Like, if everyone just said like what they were thinking and like just to be honest with everyone, it would be so much easier. Like, just get it on the table.
Yeah.
So yeah, like if they didn't do that, it'd be a lot harder. But you can tell things are different. Like, you can tell like someone's not smiling as much, or that you can tell like, the stress in their voice if you get a call about certain situations. And you can even see the thought process is different. Like, if they're in a situation that, triggers a memory of theirs or something like that, they don't think through the situation as much as they would another situation that you're like, okay, we just had this. Like, what's blocking you from doing this in this situation?
Where's the disconnect?
Yeah. Because you see it in the decisions that they make.
Well, that's trauma informed, right? Like, it's being aware of what we bring to the table and why. And it's not always, it's not logical, it's emotional, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, I love that you have that for your staff too, because like that vulnerability, it's very raw, but that's their strength. The strength comes from that for you.
I would always imagine though, if and as an outsider kind of looking in, trying to understand it, you talked about the importance or how elderly are treated and how people are valued and how the life is valued towards the end of, it's existence or its presence. What, like, after seeing it so many times, it doesn't sound logical, right? Like, why? But why do you think that happens?
Oh,
I think
I might be too blunt.
Well,
no,
that's what we want.
Because we're so self-absorbed as a society. Oh my gosh. How are we not taking care of our elderly, care of our parents, our grandparents, the people that have created this world, that we created, part of the world that we live in whatever form, and that how can we not show respect to those that have come before us? It just boggles my mind, because we're just, I don't know what we're constantly after as human beings. A larger car, just sometimes caught up in our own world. And, people are inherently beautiful and good and have so much goodness. And so it's just, how do we tap into that more in order to showcase like how much better we would all be as society if we actually took care of everyone.
Yeah.
Like in that, beyond the spectrum of our elders, but I mean, look at those that are homeless, that don't have a place over their head because of, a circumstance that's
usually
out of their
paycheck
control.
or something, not a family. It's something, it's not usually something to their quote unquote fault, for lack of a better word, right? So
I think it's also like how society views aging in general too. It's something that, it's almost like a defect. Like, you're getting older, you got to do everything you can to look younger. It's almost like that's not good. Aging is a natural part of the process of every living creature. But yet we put so much emphasis on stop the aging, that people almost make it seem like it's a bad thing.
Well, when you're young, it's hurry up and grow up.
Yeah.
Hurry up and stay young.
Yeah.
It's like, which one is it?
We were talking out there about like the amount of, what's in magazines and what's portrayed as beauty. There should be like Beautiful Souls calendar 2023 that shows
Beautiful.
really real life.
like,
Heard it here
like wrinkle lines are beautiful. They're add so much character in somebody's face, but yet like, let's fill it with Botox or
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's true though.
No, but then it's like, and
It's not what the value is, right?
and even the way that things used to be, like multi-generational homes, like you don't see it as much as you used to, right?
Yeah.
The younger generation is not growing up with the older generation.
I find that interesting that you mentioned that.
They're like segregated.
Yeah.
They have their own homes.
Yeah.
And so it's very much like they don't see that. Like younger generations don't see.
And also different like parts of our society too. Like I remember in education, I served a community where there was a lot of intergenerational families. And, so you'd have 3, sometimes 4 generations in one home. And I remember in these meetings, they'd be like, oh, yeah, it's one of those large households. They spoke negatively of it.
You mean amongst staff?
Yeah. Meetings
okay.
when we're discussing, like, say if there was an issue with a child that had an educational issue or behavior concern and how to support the child.
Got it.
You'd have a context conversation of the larger community or of the larger family. And that would sometimes come up, and it was often spoke very negatively. Like it was this multi-gender, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, well, what's the problem with that? Yeah, because I came up from that, and I lived in my grandparents' house for a long time. My great grandparents, I knew them. They had like a little area off to the like a small house attached to the house, a little area off to the side and stuff. So, and it was just interesting because that was said in a cultural context, because these were new immigrant families primarily, right? So it was taken from that lens. But I'm like, I'm Canadian. We live like that too, and it's not a bad thing. And also there's what I've experienced too is like there's so much beauty in it too, right? There's so much beauty in like learning through the different generations and how they do things and the wealth of stories. And
I just love
like
the stories.
that. The stories are amazing.
I remember my time with my grandfather, and I cherish it.
Right.
Because we got to, I just loved the stories. I could listen to the stories all day long about them.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand what the big issue was with being around elderly, but you say that this seems like there's this general perspective of not valuing a person or life. Let's just say not even a person, but life itself as it kind of nears its end, almost like a mechanical object, right? As it nears its end of its use, it gets, it's whatever. It could be a camera, it could be anything. We actually say like it's dead, throw it away.
Yeah.
Like throw it away.
Yeah.
Like, it has no value. It's just like an object rather than the person. And it's funny, like even in, for example, in the workplace, when a person is no longer in that space anymore, in that role, I always say like you can fill a role, but you can't replace the person. It's the person themselves. So it's interesting that you point at almost like how society over time, and you just were referring to the difference between Kenya and maybe here, but I don't think it's I don't know if it's a Western thing. I don't know if it is a Western thing or not, but the devaluation, right, or the dehumanization of our own selves, of our own society, because if we're doing it generally out there, we're also doing it to ourselves in a way, aren't we?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Nobody would say that they want to devalue themselves, yet that's what happens. Yeah. And if you can say that, then I'm always trying to understand like what the cause underneath of that is, right? So why is it that you think, and you see it because at the end of life, right? And now you're having the conversations with the people themselves who are at end of life. These are the same people who at another point were young and may have been part of the same, call it, system. So when they get to their end of life, nobody wants to be devalued at that point either. And you get this sense from them that, look, we are devalued, we feel this way, and we have plenty of value in us, and they want that value. What are you hearing at that point in time in terms of how they wish to be treated?
I think for us a lot, like we see people who are at the very end of their life. So it's like less than a month prognosis.
Yeah.
For us, there's not that like necessarily like, so they might not express their like devaluing, but we see it in the way of like what supports they received before they came to us.
Yeah.
Right. We see it in the way of like not having the support at home all the time. Not, having a shortage of nursing and personal support workers to help with the care at home. But we also see it in the fact that like someone will come in and they'll have like a gentleman will have a full beard. And in talking to the family, this is not something that they ever had. They were just in the hospital for that long. No one shaved them. So one of the like greatest joys we get is to, turn that person back to who they were. And even like physical appearance as well. And the family coming in and seeing like, oh my, like that's my dad. Yeah. Like that's what he looks like. Like that's, but
like Michelle was saying with the fingernails, right?
Yeah.
Just these, these personal, like just, we take advantage of the simple things, right?
Yeah. So just like valuing them still as, who they were, even doing little things like we had someone who had no family. Like we were honestly her family. There was other families at the hospice that kind of got word that she had no family and they became her family. But even little things like she was very possessive over some of her possessions. And even when she was unconscious, we still kept them in her hand.
Yeah.
Things like that, just to value what they valued before. But definitely like in the supports that people get, it's very obvious that the healthcare system doesn't prioritize, aging and dying.
It's wild.
It's crazy.
Where all of our services are, the care and comfort that's provided at hospice is free. There's no charge to families. But yet we are open because of the generosity of the community. So the community provides 50% of all of our funding to keep in operation, the other 50 from the Ministry of Health. But how is it that way? It, it really boggles the mind.
You see like where the priority is.
Yeah.
As a society, it's like death is something that's looked at as like an opponent. Like you have to combat it. You have to battle it. we see it even in the language we use. If you read like obituaries, it's like, well, after a short battle with cancer, after a long fight with this or struggle with this. It's in the language we use, but yet it's inevitable. It's a part of who we are. We are going to die.
It's part of life.
But the way we talk about it is like a very negative thing that we have to try to combat and we have to try to stall at all costs. But really, if we just came to terms with that, this is the reality that, I'm going to die one day. Someone else in my life is going to die one day. The benefit of that is the appreciation for the life you have now. And, to choose the way you want to live and to appreciate the small moments, whatever they are. But we talk about it so negatively. And then we don't talk about it at all, which gives it like more power because we're not talking about it.
Yeah. People are too scared to many times, right?
So how do you talk about death not negatively?
I think like from a young age, right? So like for myself, I grew up in a household that, people died, animals died, and it wasn't something that we shied away from. We went to funerals as children. Yeah. If we were scared, it would be one of those situations where like a parent would come with us to go see someone. It might have been like an open casket to show us that there's nothing to be afraid of. We visited people that were in the hospital, that we knew that they were dying. There was like, as children, always a hope that, they would be well again, but it's not something that like we shied away from at all. So for me, it's easy to talk about. Like there's no like negativity. This is what happens. Where now I find, a lot of people are like, don't want to expose people to that. Even children, like they know what's happening.
They know.
They're very intuitive. They know what's happening, and what they don't know, they're going to make up themselves, and it's usually a lot worse than what the actual reality of the situation is. So, it's okay for kids to, see someone who is dying. It's okay for that to be, but now I find like even little things like someone's pet dies and the first thing is like, oh, we better buy another one that looks exactly the same, but like, why are we doing that?
Yeah.
Because it's very much, it's natural.
That pet, yeah.
It's natural. So why are we hiding this natural, like, life transition? We celebrate all the other ones. We prepare for all the other ones. But why aren't we preparing for dying?
It's hard to face sadness, right? Like, it's hard. Like, it's easier for us. And not that I'm saying, like it is important to face it. Like, when I talk about end of life or death with, like, say, my mom or something, it's very different than us having a conversation about it because you love that person so much. So it's hard.
But to find, like, after that conversation, like, do you find that you're closer to that person?
Well, yeah. And that's what I mean. You draw strength from looking at and facing that sadness.
That vulnerability.
And then you all feel better after the conversation because then we know we're more open, we're vulnerable with each other, we can face it together.
You're not creating, like you said, the story in your head, right?
Yeah. Because it's just natural. So why are we not talking about it?
You're just so strong.
Yeah. No, but like even in my life, it's very much like people don't understand. Like, after getting married, like I knew at that time exactly what my husband's wishes were. He was in his, early 30s, and I knew exactly, if something were to happen, what to do. And those change over time. Yeah. Right. So, we revisited
it. Don't you find it like liberating a little bit to talk about it?
I enjoy talking about it. I don't know what it is, but like
it's like now it's out and open, and there you talked about being honest about it, and it's almost like this weight lifted off your shoulders. Do you feel that way as well? Like
and then there's no uncertainty or fear. Like then somebody you love is facing end of life. You don't have to have those questions in a moment of trauma or in a moment of sadness, or you already know how I can best respect and love this person in their final moments because you've already had that conversation 10 years ago. Yeah. So you already know.
It's the right time to start talking about something like that.
Today.
Always.
Yesterday.
Yeah. But like there's little things that people will say that are actually like, if you read into them, you're like, actually, that, like, how many times have you heard an older person say, like, I'm not going to be around forever? But yet we're like, oh, don't worry about
say that.
Like,
It's all
Or talk like that.
Yeah.
But really, you could be like, is that something you think about? Like,
Yeah.
like,
Tell me about
tell me about that. Like, what are your thoughts around, what's happening to you? But we tend to shy away from those because it's very like an emotive subject, right? Like it brings up a lot of emotions. A lot of the time, like, sadness and things like that, or, memories of like other issues. But if we don't, we just kind of hold it all in. And then when we need to talk about it, it's like, instead of spending the last final moments you have with someone, we're trying to have all these conversations about, that could have been resolved. Yeah.
And that's the thing too, like when I was listening to you, really, if brought up, who is it? Dr. Dan Siegel, he popularized the term name it to tame, or tame it to name it within neuroscience. I think it was Hebb in the 40s kind of coined, or did the initial research on it about synaptic connections in the brain. But that's how you are able to move through things, if you name it to tame it and be able to identify things. And it just makes things a lot more manageable when we can name it. And then you have an entry point for a constructive conversation or a compassionate conversation. But yeah, it's such a taboo topic, for lack of a better word.
Yes, taboo. That's the word. So do you notice in hearing these conversations that you notice that people are now having to get through at that moment, do you notice there to be a general pattern in the kind of things that generally they're trying to work out in the last minute that they could have talked about a long time ago? What are the most common things that people end up talking about or thinking about?
I think for us, being very end of life is like how to celebrate this person's life, or how, like, even things like funeral arrangements and, where they should go, or what kind of, they never ask them, like, would you want to be cremated, or like, just these conversations as well. So it takes away from the moment, like being in the moment with them, to more of a, like, we have to get, A, B, and C done. But for us, I think it's a lot to do with like because by the time they come to hospice, I mean, there's already been a decision that, it's going to be comfort care. There's not going to be any resuscitation and things like that. But I mean, those have been figured out maybe just at the hospital. Like, and I find even like care workers, they don't like to bring it up either, right? So we've had people call the hospice and been like, my dad's in the hospital. They keep on running tests.
Yes.
We don't want this. Like he wouldn't want this. We just want comfort care.
Yeah.
And it takes the family to bring it up to the care team. And then it's almost like a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
For like everyone. Well, like if you just brought this up at the beginning, we wouldn't have this like struggle.
I think about that in the medical. I remember you just made me think of when my mother-in-law passed away. And she knew she was dying. She was like, Trina, straight up, I'm dying. Like, this is happening. And she'd send me off to like do all these things because she had like codes and keys and things stashed places. And, people are cool and they do stuff, right? And I remember she knew she was full of cancer. So the oncologist comes in and she was in ICU at this point. And they're like, well, when she gets stabilized, we'll start with chemo and radiation. And she was nonverbal at this point, a little bit. And I just looked at her and I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, why are you talking about radiation and chemotherapy when she gets stable? I said, she keeps going down and she's been telling everyone she's dying. So why is she feeling this?
Or about this whole thing to try and preserve life?
And then so what it was is that they were so siloed. He's like, well, I'm just the oncologist. But no one was coming in and telling this family that she was going to pass away. And she knew it, and they knew it. And I just saw the damage it did for my husband at the time and the family, because, they're like, Trina, stop saying she's dying. I'm like, she's telling me, and it's okay. Like, we need to talk about these things. I felt it was an opportunity to kind of have conversations and stuff. But yeah, these were medical professionals and they could not say she was dying.
Yeah.
And within 12 hours of the oncologist being there, she passed away. And so it was just,
But
it's
yet if
so
you like knew
hurtful.
that before, you can like plan different things of like, you know, how you want your last days to be, right? Like who you want to talk to. Like usually at the time someone's dying, it's like, you know, they, you know, want to, you know, say thank you to someone or,
Right.
you know, even ask for forgiveness about something, right? You don't have that.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have that preparation to.
And that's what she had me do. She'd get these list of groceries for my parents, do this for my sister. This is what, like, all of these things.
Do you think, though,
Yeah.
some part of society might feel, I mean, just playing the advocate for the other side here, is that you don't want to talk about it because it sounds like you're giving up?
But I think it's changing the definition of what hope means.
Right.
Because I think from a medical institutional perspective, there's always like, there's hope we can try this other therapy. There's hope, let's try this experimental drug. This is hope.
Right.
Whereas let's change what that is and let's hope for like the most amazing end of life experience possible. And what does that look like to that person? And maybe it is taking every experimental drug, but maybe if we really just stop and listen to the person, maybe it is like withdrawing treatment and spending time with family or
That's what I would want.
doing that. Yeah. So it's like,
Right? Like-
that could be
Precious
hope.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It changes throughout like the course of everything, right? Like when someone's first diagnosed, it might be the hope for a cure. And then when that's not, you know, that's not feasible, then it's a hope for something else. Maybe there's an occasion that's coming up, like a grandchildren's like wedding.
Right.
And then there's a hope to live to that. Or there's,
Right.
you know, a hope to, you know, not have pain.
Right.
You know, the hope changes throughout, and there's always ways to find hope in situations. It just changes. The direction of it changes, and the definition of it to someone changes. But there's always hope. And then hope for, like, you know, a legacy, hope that people will remember you. And instead of, you know, trying to figure out what that person wants, just to have those, like, you know, things that you can do, like talking to someone, you know, listening to someone's story gives them the hope that they will be remembered, right? Like there's always different types of hope, and it changes, and it doesn't have to be the same. And throughout our whole life, it changes really what we hope for or what brings us hope or things like that.
What are the things that people hope for in the end?
I think for us, just a very peaceful death.
Yeah.
A lot of, you know, people who come to hospice, a lot of them struggle with their symptoms that they're having, and they need that 24-hour support with the symptoms that they're having. So a lot of times it is like hope for making sure they're comfortable. You know, it might be a hope that like you'll have a certain person by your side when you die. You know, it changes.
So, thank you for sharing that. I mean, what, in obviously working at the hospice, you would say has had an impact on you personally in your own, or would you say it's had an impact on how you view end of life and how you've then in turn live life, would you say?
For sure, like in turn living life, life appreciating everything you have. You know, I'm not one to be like very materialistic. Like I don't need these things, because you see at the end of life, like you're not bringing those things. Like you don't need that. So definitely just like living simply, and you know, strengthening your relationships. You know, visiting people like now before it's too late. Like we tend to have an influx of people come at the very end of life, and we had a resident who said, like, you know, we told them your uncle's coming to visit, and the look on their face to be like, why?
Yeah.
Like they weren't there for me all these years. Like why now? That he's doing it for himself, not for me. You know, and so
It's hard for people, eh?
yeah. So it's just like taking the opportunity to live now while you have the time.
And how can, I mean, the work that hospices do, I mean, look at that. I mean, it's amazing right? The focus on hope, the focus on, comfort, the focus on the value of life. Isn't it ironic? It's at the hospice that they value life the most. I love that about, hospices, and the one that I know here, my favorite one. There, I said
He set the bar high.
Hill House Hospice.
What could others who are not, connected to a hospice, who never heard of it, what things could we do who are from outside? How can we support?
That's a great question. I think just having conversations, talking about it, talking about hospice, talking about end of life. Because although, we love Hill House Hospice, it's about hospice, it's about families, it's about end of life. And so it's really about starting those conversations with your family, with your friends, and having more awareness about what really hospice is. I remember one, I know I'm diverging into a funny topic, but I remember one call that I made to a banking partner, and so saying, "Oh, you're from Hill House Hospice," and so they're like, "Oh, hospice. Oh, you must serve like really spicy foods there."
Oh,
it's like,
spice.
"Oh, wow, no, hospice."
Wow.
But just so I think really having a greater awareness in our community about hospice, about Hill House Hospice, about what opportunities are there for families and for those facing end of life.
What other services do you have at Hill House? Just so I'm aware. I'm not aware of what everything, because I know the ones in the region where I've practiced, because everyone's a little bit different. So what's the spectrum? I know you have in-house, obviously, hospice care, but in terms of familial extensions, do you have any programs like that for families or support groups or things like that? Or do you just kind of do that individually, like have your staff work with families as they come in individually?
So we're like, Hill House is a residential hospice. So we have 3 bedrooms. We take care of people at the very end of their life. While the families are there, we take care of them as well. Even making sure they're fed and things like that, because they tend to forget.
Yeah.
But we do partner with like other community services for things like grief and bereavement and things like that. It's not something that we've taken on right now, but there's always like...
But you have those community collaborations and connections.
Yeah. So someone called the other day and I was able to like let them know like what community hospice can help in certain situations. But we do call like residents, families, after a little while, we do call them to see how they're doing.
As people are, you talked about things that people can talk about, right? To have these conversations. If people are hesitant, don't know where to start, don't know how to approach it, because you got to remember, you've done this, you've seen it for so long, you're a pro, right?
It's just like commonplace.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, how do you not know this?
How do you not know this? Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? For those that are finding it uncomfortable or who find it a little awkward, right, to start having this conversation, what's your advice? Where can we start? What sort of areas kind of make it like, easier grounds to shallower waters to step into?
I think sometimes there is no easy answer. Like, so if you're dealing with your own family or
Great. We're
things
just not
like
going to
that.
start then.
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to have to be like, this is going to be difficult, but this is what I want to talk about, because I think it'll help the both of us. And it'll create less fear. If
Like
it's
I
just
asked my son what's on his, what his test is coming up, and he's like, can we not talk about this right now? Okay, when are we going to talk about this if we're not going to talk about this now? We'll talk about this. We push things off.
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about something that's a little uncomfortable.
and you can't force those people to talk about it.
Right.
I think
So it's just
storybooks have been helpful, because it's about finding the words, because people don't have the word. Even though there's simple words like "I am dying," "you are going to die," and this is the vernacular, but saying that is so hard. So I find sometimes storybooks have been helpful to kind of start that conversation, at least in my experience. I don't know if you've ever had that with your families at all, or...
Usually by the time they're with us,
Yeah, you get them when they're already
yeah.
at the very end. Yeah.
Although there are there is a lot of, there can be denial. It's usually for the younger residents with their families and, having a lot of denial and don't want to talk about that. And, they see changes in the person. They see different changes at end of life. And it's just like having a conversation to teach them what's coming next. But definitely, there are some people that don't want to talk about it, and you can't force that.
No.
And so you're
Sounds like most people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But
So you're just there to
understanding that talking about it actually makes it better, not worse.
Yeah.
And not talking about it makes it worse, not better. So how could we kind of bridge that gap is what I'm trying to figure out. How can we take those first steps, or where can we find those first steps? And I like how you said it. It's not necessarily easy. We're always looking for how to, or make it easy, or dummies, something for dummies, right? But hospice for dummies. Maybe it's like the book.
But it's your
things
first
we're coming up with today. Hospice for dummies. Like, if there was such a thing, how could we make it a little bit, easier to transition that conversation, or what's close enough? Maybe there's nothing.
I think it just starts with one conversation.
Yeah.
Like everything that's fearful, everything that this might be awkward, this might not feel good in the moment, or I'm not unsure about it. It's like, well, let's just try it. We're not going to know unless we try. So let's just start with one conversation about it with somebody that maybe we're close to, or maybe somebody that we're not, because maybe that would be less fearful. And then going from there, do it once, and then, okay, maybe I can do it. Oh, wow, I felt good after that conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, okay, let me try another conversation a little bit longer this time, or more in depth, or talk to somebody about what I want for end of life. Anyway, I think it just all starts with just a conversation.
I think what you said was talking. And it could be to someone, like you said, like maybe you don't know them as much. Maybe the person that, you want to talk about death with doesn't want to talk about it with you.
Right.
Because you're too close to them. But maybe they'll talk about it with someone else who they don't have that close
They don't
relationship.
have that filter either, right? Of worrying about hurting someone's feelings or...
I got a podcast idea for you now. Well, can you imagine if you started actually having these conversations openly? And wouldn't that make life, like you're imagining right now? Right?
Sorry, yeah.
So much better
can
for
visualize
so
it, yeah.
many people, right? And those are ways.
They have groups too, right? So a lot of people don't know, it's a newer concept. Have you ever heard of a death cafe?
No.
So a death cafe is something that they kind of introduced in the UK, I think in 2010 or 2011. And it's just a group of like-minded people who want to talk about death and dying. There's no necessary agenda or themes or anything. It's just, you don't know what will happen. You're just going to have a conversation, and it's going to be about death.
Then you just drop into this cafe?
Yeah, so there's different cafes. Actually, I'm going to attend one tomorrow night.
Are you really?
Yeah, it's virtual. And because I just wanted to see what it was like. Because I was like, you know what, I've heard about them, so let's see. So I am, and what it is, it's just to talk openly. If you have questions, ask questions, and it's not, it's just a conversation to have with people who also want to talk about death.
That makes it easier.
Yeah.
For sure.
And the more we talk about it, the more we want to live more.
Yeah.
Right?
You know, it's so funny you say that, because I remember years ago working with a little boy he's passed long now, but was dying of cancer. And his parents could barely talk. They would just break down. I couldn't even imagine. Imagine. They would break down anytime they'd start to talk about it. But he would talk about it. And the more he talked about it, the more energized he became about, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to raise money for this, or if I have bed days, I'm going to do this. And so he knew with his treatments how he would feel, and he knew, he planned what his end of life funeral would be, his funeral arrangements and stuff like that. But it's so true. Children are just so amazing that way. But that's what he taught me, was the more you talk about it and you can make it, actually, he was joyous. That was when I think back of his, he was quite joyous. And I just remember everyone around him always falling apart, myself included at certain times. And he just taught us so much about just talking and being open and just what that invites. And I remember connecting with his parents a couple of times afterward, and the way he was helped them afterward.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't tap into it when he was here, because how can you? Yeah. But after he passed, they were like, he started this with little projects and things he wanted to raise money for and stuff. So they've now continued that as his legacy, right? So it just, and it's actually helped the parents serve purpose. So it's so amazing when we open these conversations and tap into, it seems kind of counterintuitive to say, the joyous side of the end of life, and how we can create different opportunities for ourselves out of that to heal and move through it. Because I couldn't imagine losing a child, and these parents were able to stay together and persevere after that, right? Well, pretty amazing what we're capable of.
Well, I'm so glad you guys came here to join us to talk about some things we have never really talked about.
So important.
And to shed light on, the amazing work that hospices are doing, the amazing work that you're doing, and not only how it benefits the patrons or the people that are passing through, the residents, but to see how the staff who work there are directly impacted, and how they take the impact of end of life and show an impact that is so positive, that is so humanizing, and that is so enlightening. It's funny how we discover about life through death.
Through death.
And if there was things that people could share, I mean, that's what I've always thought. It's somebody said, there's nothing like death to give you clarity on something, right? And so you get clear, and I can just see from the way they're talking too, how clear you are on what you're saying. You're not having to think about it or guess; it just comes right out, and how impactful that is for you, and how you would wish that kind of clarity, right, for so many people, so that it's not so that they could have not just a happy ending, but they could have a happy everything, or a better everything, right? Any last thoughts or last words to leave with us on, how our end of life just really gives us insight into having a better life?
I guess I just feel very thankful and privileged to do the work that we do, to work with the folks that we work with, and that families put so much trust in us. It's, I think, just so personally connected to Hill House, to hospice, to the care and work that goes on there, that it, just feel very fortunate and privileged. I'm just thankful, I guess, is what I'd like to say.
None of us are, we don't do this for the money. We always laugh about it because hospice isn't funded properly, so we can never compete. I can never compete.
You're not
None of us are in it for the money. No one's there who doesn't want to be there, because you couldn't do what you do if you don't want to be there. It's just very much, not a job.
The calling, really.
It's not a job. I've never felt oh my goodness, I have to go to work today. I've never had that feeling.
We're so lucky. We're just really, really fortunate.
I just find it amazing that in a place where there's so much death, that there's so much appreciation for life itself. And I think that's such a great insight to gain from you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's super, super insightful.
Thank you for having us.